Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. We're continuing on with our conversation of migration to the United States. Now this time we're going to be looking at some of the changes that have taken place over time to the immigration policy of the United States in terms of who can and cannot come or could not, can and could not, or could not come to the United States during particular times. Now of course migration to the United States is still a relatively hot button issue. Today the conversation mainly revolves around illegal migration to the United States, and some come up with different arguments about illegal migration to the United States. Some say that the main reason is issue is that our migration policy is too difficult, it's very expensive, it's kind of convoluted, it is convoluted, and can take someone a really long time to become a citizen of the United States, even if they do try to follow the legal path to citizenship. And of course, a lot of the folks that are upset are because we have such a large number of people who are in the country illegally for one reason or another, and that is what's getting them upset. Nobody really gets upset about legal migration. The main concern is over illegal migration, and it's been exacerbated over the last several years because of the recession that we've had in the United States, and so that's really kind of added a complicated twist to the whole discussion of migration. So anyhow, we'll continue on with our conversation. So if we look at U.S. immigration policy, initially in the very beginning of the country, really had an unrestricted immigration policy. There was no set people who could and could not come, and set number. Of course, we had a large amount of territory that we were in control of, and we had a lot of space to move out, and so we were actually trying to take over certain parts of the country and populate certain parts of the country, and so you actually had the government encouraging people to come to the United States. Now, that doesn't mean that we didn't have issues. If you look at the history really of any part of the United States over time, you had issues between ethnicities in the large cities in the Northeast. You had a great amount of animosity between some of the different ethnicities, whether it was because of religion, like with the Irish Catholics moving to New York, or if it was just an ethnic issue, like you had issues between, again, the Irish and the Germans in some of the larger cities. And a lot of that kind of goes back to some of the original issues in the fighting that was taking place in Europe hundreds of years prior. And so some of those old animosities found their way over to the United States. But not only that, as people moved to the United States and became accustomed to the United States and maybe went from being poor to wealthy, there's always this image that the wealthy individuals look down upon the poor new immigrants coming in and would try to take advantage of them and things along those lines. So again, even though we had unrestricted immigration policy, people were likely to go wherever they had relatives, and we'll talk about chain migration here in just in a couple of videos. But as we move forward in time, the United States began to put certain restrictions on immigration policy, and a lot of this is framed or needs to be framed correctly within the context of history. And you think about what's going on in the world historically during these particular time periods. Some of the first times we started to put restrictions on migration were what we call the Quota Act of 1921 and the National Origin Act of 1924. And so what these do is, these particular laws is they are to set limits on the number of people who can come into the United States. Now, you see it's called the Quota Act and the National Origin Act. So we're talking about the setting of quotas, which is a limitation on the number of people who can come to the United States. In the National Origin Act, I was going to show that it's going to be based upon where somebody comes from. And so there's going to be like this country limit. You can only a certain number of people can come from a specific country into the United States. And we see that, at least, whether it's overtly or covertly, the limits were meant to be set on those coming from non-Western European countries. You think about who initially came to the United States. Mostly it was Western Europeans, and then it was not till much later that we had a lot of non-Western European nations coming in, because the way that the quota system worked was that the quota was based on the number of people who were coming from a specific country that were already in the United States. And so whatever your number was from that country, that's what the quota was based on. So whoever already had a lot of people here, their number was going to be naturally higher because the quota is going to be based on that number of people who are here already. And so the way that it worked was that only 2% of the people could come based upon the number of people who are already in the United States, and the number was based on the 1910 census, and so it was even earlier than the 1920s, and so that means even fewer people from those non-Western European countries were going to come to the United States. So again, naturally the 2% is going to be larger for Western European countries, naturally smaller for non-Western European countries, because of the fact of the people who are already in the United States. Now we think about again what's going on during the 1920s. We had just gotten through World War I. You had several communist revolutions in Eastern Europe. You had the communist revolution in Russia, and so some of this is going to be set up to keep some of those communists from coming over to the United States and trying to spread some of those elements of communism in the United States, and so that's what's going to be a driving force behind some of these things, or at least some of these, the desire to not have certain people from, especially Russia and some of the Eastern European countries, from coming over. In 1968, we passed new legislation, and we replaced country quotas with a hemisphere quota. So the way that this works is that instead of looking at specific countries, we're saying, okay, well, never mind, we'll look at the hemispheres, Eastern Hemisphere and Western Hemisphere. And if we're going to take people, we'll take 170,000 people from the Eastern Hemisphere and only 120,000 people from the Western Hemisphere. So again, this gives kind of a decided advantage to certain groups of people, specifically Western Europeans. And so because of the fact that most of the world lives in the Eastern Hemisphere, it gives a disadvantage to those who are in Latin America, because obviously Latin American countries, Caribbean countries are within the Western Hemisphere, and so it's going to restrict the movement of those people into the United States. And we can look here at this chart, this particular chart. It shows us where a lot of people are, where different people are coming to the United States from, and again, it kind of follows the trends that we talked about over time. So again, mostly up into the 1920s, you have mostly Northern and Western European people coming, and a lot of that has to do with Industrial Revolution, who initially was in the United States, and things along those lines. Then you had this movement of Southern and Eastern Europeans, a lot of it having to do with things happening during World War I, after World War I, communist revolutions and things like that. And then you see this heavily restricted period of immigration. A lot of it has to do with World War II and events leading up to that. Then, of course, as we discussed, large numbers of people coming from Asia and Latin America towards the end of the 1900s and into the early 2000s. In 1978, we replace our hemisphere quota with a global quota. And our global quota is going to be capped at 290,000 people, with 20,000 people, no more than 20,000 people coming from any one specific country. And so, again, this kind of spreads it out a little bit more evenly, but says that only 20,000 people can come from one particular country. And again, limiting the number of people who come here, which kind of further complicates the issue, especially if we look at people coming from South America, Latin America, and places along those lines. Current American policy is that we allow 620,000 people to come to the United States on a yearly basis, with only 7% of that total number can come from any one specific country. And so you can see over time it's changed, and today it seems to be a little bit more liberal. But the problem, of course, is that a lot of people run into is the speed at which the American government moves to check through people and to give them the permission to not just move to the United States, but then become legal residents of the United States. And also, again, a lot of it has to do with the expense of going through all of these processes while one is moved to the United States and is trying to get set up and get started. And so, again, those are just the different trends we've had. And next time we're going to be talking about some internal migration trends within the United States.